Hi everybody, welcome to episode number 2 of MWM Media. That's right, you guys, made it the whole 2 episodes. Pretty neat.
Let's rip it up. I'm gonna break it up. I'm gonna lock it up at the ball tonight.
We've been getting a great reaction so far, so thanks everybody for sticking around this long. I know it's the second episode, but I feel like we've put ourselves into a committed relationship and that between me and you, there's going to be like a certain amount of expectation and obligation. You want to watch stuff, I want to film stuff, and how are we going to scratch each other's backs? Well, I'll tell you, I need your help. I want you guys to start sending me ideas, things that you've seen in movies or TV shows or commercials or rad ideas you had from your favorite comic book or, something that you saw that one guy do once. Whatever. Just shoot us a Facebook message and ask us to make it. So, send us your messages, give us our ideas, and we'll go out and film them, deconstruct it, and then do a tutorial on it. And then you'll get like a cool little blurb saying like, hey, Rob Roy in Texas wanted to know how to do the Harry Potter teleportation effect. Well, thanks, Rob. And then we'd put it up or something. So, do it. 'Cause why not? Damn.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another exciting visual effects tutorial. I am your host with the most, Matt Wood, and let's do some VFX. All right. All right. Composure. I'm ready. I was born ready. All right, where were we? Now, today we are working on doing this really cool airplane shot where the airplane done flies through the air and this giant laser beam comes down out of the sky and hits it and blows that shot up. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to completely reconstruct this shot from scratch, and we will show you how we did it. Little heads up, the only plugin that you're actually going to require to make this shot work is Element 3D from videocopilot.net. We are also using their Jet Strike airplane model pack today. However, you can find really awesome airplane models at tons of other websites like turbosquid.com or Sketchfab. And I know that there's probably a couple others out there that have some fantastic models that are either very cheap or free. That as long as you make sure they are an OBJ or a Cinema 4D, a C4D file, After Effects will be able to import them directly into the software and then allow you to texture them independently. And if you want more information on that, you can go to Video Copilot's website. Obviously, they're going to have the best tutorials out there for how to operate it. Andrew Kramer does great stuff, and I highly suggest going down there because you can learn a lot from them in general. I know that I have. All right, so let's get started. First things first, we're going to come and create ourselves a new composition, and we're going to call this Plane Beam, and we'll make it about 30 seconds. We're going to hit OK. This is going to bring us into our beautiful blank slot here. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to start focusing on building our background image. We once again are using some stuff from Video Copilot. We're using a few of their aerial texture packs, which came with Jet Strike. It's a bunch of really awesome high-resolution sky images that you can use at your leisure. But we're just going to pick one, and I think we're going to go with this one. We're just going to kind of mix up the original shot a bit, and we're going to drop it in. And when we zoom out, we'll notice that it is way bigger than 1080p. But you know what? That's all right, because we're going to be making it 3D. So we're going to come down here to our little toggle. If that's not viewable, hit F4. And it'll go between your transfer and track options to all of your 3D options and camera options. So we're going to make that 3D. We're going to select V on our keyboard, and we're going to hit the Z axis there. And we're going to hold down Shift, and we're just going to push it way back in Z space until it fills our frame. That looks pretty good. Should give us enough wiggle room there to kind of maneuver the camera around a little bit and try and get some more dynamic shots. And so we're actually going to kind of mix up that original shot a little bit. We're not going to be doing it exactly verbatim. That was a shot that we originally did for a short film. And I'll tell you, the short film was actually a fan film about Con Air.
So what was that all about? Oh, nothing. Except they somehow managed to get every creep and freak in the universe onto this one plane, and then somehow managed to let them take it over, and then somehow managed to stick us right smack in the middle. Hi, Garland.
We were doing our best to try and get Steve Buscemi and Nicolas Cage in, but unfortunately Nick Cage suffered a terrible accident with some bees and couldn't be available to film. So sadly, the short film itself is lost, but we have the VFX for it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of make them a little more interesting. All right, so now we have our background image here, which is already starting to cook up. The next thing we want to do is we're going to create ourselves our element layer, which is going to be our airplane. So we're going to go to Layer, New, and Solid. And we'll just call this Airplane. Cool. Now that we have that set up, we're going to come down to Effect, Video Copilot, and Element 3D. We're going to come into our scene setup here inside of Element. We will toggle over to Jet Strike, siphon over to this Air Force One looking model, which is kind of cool. So that's kind of fun. Now we can get even better than Con Air. I mean, this will be a lot more fun. So to start animating, what we're going to do is we're going to come to our group null. We're going to hit P for position. We're going to click on it to start keyframing it. We're also going to hit R for rotation and orientation, and we're going to keyframe all of them. Now, if you want to see every single keyframe that you have underneath any layer at any given time, click on that layer and hit U on your keyboard, and it'll bring up every single keyframe so you can see what the hell you're doing. All right, so now to get started, we're going to take our airplane here, once again in Z-Space, and we're just going to push it back a bit. Click on Z and Shift, and we're just going to bring our airplane real far in, and then we're going to pull it up again in Z-Space so that it's almost coming directly at the camera, up again to just kind of flatten it out. And we can even have it bank in just a little bit more. In our end frame here, we do want the plane to come past the camera. And now that we're kind of seeing how long this is going to be, we can actually trim our timeline down here. Since we want the plane to kind of like come into the camera, and now that we have this basic motion figured out, we're going to drag it in even more until it comes off screen. And we can take that, and since it's going a little bit further, we can drag it a little bit out more. Now the next step we want to do is create a camera to interact with our 3D objects, just to kind of give our shot a little bit more depth. And to do that, we go into Layer, New, Camera, and we did 50 millimeters, sorry. And we came down to our camera options under Transform, and we just keyframed all of that, and that's going to allow us to animate the camera. To start out with, we hit our camera tool, and we zoomed in just a little bit on the shot, and then as we come out to the back, we pulled the camera out and panned. So now we get this cool kind of dynamic camera motion as the plane's coming by, and that looks pretty cool. Now, one more thing that we're going to do just to kind of give this a little bit of a sort of handheld vibe is we're going to go into Orientation, and we're going to hit Alt and click on the stopwatch, and this is going to bring up our Transform option as a expression. So we're going to delete that. We're going to type in wiggle, parentheses, 1.5, comma, 1.0, end parentheses, and hit enter. Now what this is going to do is give just a little bit of camera shake to our shot as the camera is zooming out and doing its thing. So if we come back and watch that again, we'll notice it's got just a nice little bit of camera wobble. All right, so now to get started on creating our explosion on the plane as the beam hits it, we are going to be using a series of stock packs from a couple different websites, one of which is also from included with Jet Strike. It's their aerial explosions. Here's another cool one. You know, I'm kind of feeling this. This looks pretty implosive. So we're going to come back down to our plane beam shot here, and we're going to just bring down this aerial explosion, and we want it to go above our beam and above the plane. And we can see that the explosion just kind of happens in midair here, nothing happening yet. So we have to time this up with our shot and then also make it 3D as well so that we can better composite it back in. So let's pull this out a bit here, and let's come down to the end of where our beam hits the plane, which is right here. And we'll notice that this is all sorts of out of whack. So we want to maybe bring that in. And we want to not only do that, but we also want it to kind of follow the motion of the plane as the plane is exploding. So what we can do is, since this is a 3D layer, we can actually parent it to the airplane's group null. And what that will do is it will make it travel in 3D space along with our airplane, which is pretty cool. So now what we want to do is we want to time it up so that as it's hitting, it's going to hit at the right time and point. So we can see that the implosion hasn't quite happened yet, so maybe we can scrub it down to about there. That looks good. And let's zoom in here, and let's try and get this matched up with our engine. We can scooch it back in space a little bit here. Let me pull it up just a hair. And we can even pull it a little bit further back in Z space until it's right above the beam. And we can actually even take our beam layer here and just push it back a little. And that looks pretty good. And let's actually, we'll pull this back out right about so. That looks nice. And let's take a quick peek and see how that looks. And that's pretty fun because we can see that the explosion actually follows into the shot as the plane blows up. Kind of a neat little effect there. And then we'll hit Control P again and go forwards. And we'll notice that now we want to have it almost completely off camera. And we'll pull it down a little. Scooch it over a little bit. And once again, pull it forward so that it's almost off frame. There we go. All right, now that we have our beam and explosion timed up and animated how we want, we're starting to get a pretty good look for how that's going to boop out there. It's looking pretty good. Now, the one thing we want to do also is we maybe want to add a little bit more of an intense implosion here when we have this initial hit and this explosion from the beam. So we're going to come back into our assets that we've collected, and we've gotten a couple Action Essentials 2 kind of spark implosions, just kind of like debris charges and stuff. And we're just going to bring that down right behind our aerial implosion layer. And we will scrub through until we get it where we want. And once again, make it 3D. And let's maybe time this up to exactly when the beam hits. And since it's super quick, we don't necessarily have to animate this to follow through with the rest of the shot because it is such a quick little implosion there. And the sparks kind of fly off as the plane continues. And then what we can actually do is maybe right about here, we can take our charge shot and we can clip it and hit Control-Shift-D, and that will just cut your shot. And we'll hit Delete. And then what we'll do is we'll come through maybe just a few frames before, and we'll hit T to bring up opacity and keyframe it. Come down to the end of the shot when the sparks are over, and drag that down to 0. And that will just fade the sparks out after the initial explosion there. And it's looking pretty good. Right, so this is all starting to come together very nicely, and I think that we are pretty close to about where we want this thing to be. So in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to turn on all the layers that we currently have off, just so we can see what we are up to. And we'll pull the resolution back up again, so that we can get a full idea for our shot. Now, there's going to be a couple more things that we're going to start doing here, and that is working on our color correction. So now that we have everything kind of in the shot where and how we want it, let's come in and actually start looking at the color spectrums for each of these things. Now, our fire's looking kind of dull here, so we're going to come into color correction and curves, and we're just going to kind of up the contrast a little bit so that it's a little bit brighter, a little bit more orange. And we'll just drop the curve down a little bit to give it a little bit more of a kind of desaturated look. And that's looking pretty good. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to kind of color correct our background here. So what we're going to do is come back into color correction again and come back to curves. And we're just going to drop this down just a hair. And that actually looks pretty good. We can even up the contrast just a little bit. We just want to get like a little bit more darker definition in the mountains here and take a little bit less of your attention away from the background. And that looks pretty good. And we don't really have to touch too much else. And this is looking pretty good so far. Now I'm thinking the next thing that we're going to be wanting to do here is an overall color correction on the entire shot itself. So what we'll do as the last thing is we'll come into layer and new adjustment layer. What this adjustment layer is going to do is it's going to allow us to add effects to it, which will affect every layer below it without actually having to put that on each individual layer. This is great for things like overall color corrections, shake control, things of that nature. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in to with our adjustment layer selected, and we're going to go to Magic Bullet and Looks. All right, now that we have our adjustment layer selected, the next thing that we want to do within Magic Bullet Looks is you can just kind of go through each of the presets here and find one that works for you. This looks pretty good. And once we have this selected, we can also see our color ranges for the shot. And if we want to, we can actually come in and adjust our S-curve a little bit. And let's maybe darken it down just a smidge, and then up the contrast even more to kind of give a little bit more dark definition to our background and even darken up those mountains a little bit more. And that's just going to kind of, I don't know, crispen it up a little bit and also give a little bit more definition to our background. So I kind of like where that's going. We're going to hit OK. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is we want to make sure that we have motion blur activated for everything, because since the camera is moving and we have a lot of action going on, just to kind of finish out the realism of the shot, adding motion blur to it is going to give us that little final push. So with everything selected that you know is going to be a 3D layer, like our beam, airplane, and vortex elements and the explosions, we're just going to select all of those and make sure that you have your F4 toggle for 3D options on. And we're going to turn on motion blur. And since we still have motion blur activated, one other thing we can come into is back into Element 3D, down to the render settings. We're going to want to come down to ambient occlusion, and we're going to want to enable AO. And we're also going to come into motion blur and change it from comp settings to on. And this is just going to force motion blur, period, for the actual 3D model itself. And I think we are looking pretty good.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around for another episode. Hope you guys learned something cool, and stay tuned as we're going to be having these Star Wars tutorials come out in the next couple of weeks, and the short itself should be out as well around the same time, so we'll be posting about that as we work on it. Stay tuned for next week also when we build a cityscape in 3D. It's going to be fun.